Yellow is my favorite color, in case anyone is wondering about it. My mother doesn't call me before 8 p.m. on my birthday. If I'm traveling on my birthday, I have to call her at 8 p.m. South African time. She says anybody who calls me before 8 p.m. doesn't know what they're talking about, because she was at work on that day. I was born on a hot summer night, January 11th, 1977. It was a Tuesday. My mother remembers the day of the week very well. She had just knocked off from Harankua Hospital, where she was a nursing student. She knocked off at 7, got home at 7:30. She found the home where she lived, her aunt's home, family aunt, full of family members, visiting family members. She would later reflect that it was a positive omen for my birth. After long greetings, she went off to the bedroom to change out of her work uniform. Her aunt, visiting aunt, my grandmother's sister, followed her to the bedroom for a moment of privacy. That was the only adult who knew that my mother was pregnant. She was passing through to check on my mother, to check if she's ready for the baby, if she has bought the necessary stuff, and when exactly is the baby due. As they're having this conversation, she starts having pains, and it becomes apparent that maybe the baby is here. The aunt quietly calls on the uncle that had a van to take my mother to the doctor's rooms, the local doctor's rooms that stayed open late. The van is luckily parked outside. We're talking about 4-roomed township houses. It's parked outside on the front. They quietly walk out of the house without anybody at the back any wiser about the situation. My mother estimates that it must have been 8 p.m. when they got to the doctor. She obviously jumps the queue and sees the doctor. An old man, a good doctor, Dr. Maribat. Quick check on my mother, and he says, indeed, the baby's here. It's almost here. Settles my mother to deliver the baby. 15 minutes, it is done. I am out, big head, clear eyes, no jaundice. The baby and the mother are well. We get cleaned up. We get sent home. Back in the van to the house full of people. Big announcement. Mule has a baby. What? She was pregnant? So I get laid out on a kitchen table. I'm like 20 minutes old. I get laid out on a kitchen table for confirmation that indeed there's a baby. And I happen to be a girl. So everybody in the house decides to give me names of their mothers. My mother calls me Salvation. I don't know if she told anybody that name that day. A heartfelt name. My grandmother was not to know that she was pregnant. I kept myself a secret. And I was rewarded with a lifetime reminder of my kindness, Salvation. I remember this story very well. It has been told to me now for almost, 42 years. I marvel at the story. I marvel at how she remembers. And if you ask her today if I've lived up to my name, Salvation, she has a resolute yes to that. My grandmother was not amused on receiving the news that my mother had a baby. She came from a Waterkloof work, and she packed us up to send us off to the village. It was only on the insistence of the matron of the hospital and the principal of the college, because apparently my mother was the brightest student, that she was allowed to write her final nursing college exams that were a week after I was born. My mother would live in the village for 2 years, for until I was 2 years old. The only person who worked at the time, it was my grandmother. Times were hard. My grandmother could only afford to come home about 4 to 6 times a year. My aunt had a baby, so my mother said, let me go back to work. Look after the children, let me go back to work. And I'll provide, and I'll come home every month. So she literally ran away from home against her own mother's wishes and went to work. She would come home every month like clockwork, year in, year out. Christmas time was extra special. There will be extra bags of clothes and the special Christmas food the rice, the tomato sauce, the mayonnaise, the custard, the jelly, the only things you saw on Christmas. The clothes for the 25th, the 26th, and the New Year's Day. I would leave the village when I was 15 years old to live with my mother in Garangua. I would get an appreciation of what it took for my mother to have provided. She woke up at 4 a.m., left home at 5 a.m., back at 8 p.m. She could hardly keep up with the basic provisions for us. We used to take some of the provisions, Lucky Star tin, maize meal, on credit from the local supermarket. Go Rambit, Zone 3, Garangua. What stood out the most about this situation is my mother used to pay my 70 rand school fees, about $5 school fees, with her 13th check in October. I would only process it to the extent of my mother would not afford my tertiary education, and I would need to make a plan because I cannot expect her to make a plan. I went to university with a bursary. It was only in my 30s that my mother and I would have a conversation, real conversation about money. She would tell me that after she bought her property in 1997, her only property that she ever bought, her take home was 600 rand. At the time my sister was 6 years old, her nursery fees alone were 400 rand. It meant my mother was only left with 200 for all her expenses and still had to go to the village to provide. Her card would be with the loan shark for years. She would be introduced to moonlighting in private hospital, and it would be her saving grace. I would remember my mother saying over the years, if I can only earn 1,500, if I can only earn 3,000. And I would further process how she paid my 70 rand school fees in October. And I would wonder, how were we never hungry? How we never ran out of clothes? My mother is no exception. My story is not unique. I went to a primary school with many of my classmates. The only people they could ever talk about were their mothers. Their mothers who did exactly what my mother had to do. Strong, hardworking black women. They would do anything to feed the children. I marvel at knowing that I am born of such women. And I also reflect with a bit of a conflict that those women's place in the world that I live in does not reflect who they are. I find that I'm also jealous about who speaks of the potential untapped economic force that an African woman is. What do I do with all this knowing? I draw inspiration from my mother's stories. And I have chosen a career that luckily has led me to work with strong African women entrepreneurs. They exist. They are brilliant. And I insist that they should be the one to own the narrative, that the key to Africa's success is its women. Unlocking the economic potential of an African woman must be in the African woman's hands, so that it can serve her. I put up that challenge to my generation. It's the least we owe our mothers. I am excited to be part of a team of amazing women. I call them my rock stars. For the last 5 years, we have been making an investment case for a fund that focuses on supporting African women entrepreneurs. It is rewarding for me to stand here today and say our fund is at $75 million, and we are looking good to make $100 million. Our investment thesis is premised on a conviction that an African woman is an amazing asset class. We have lived experience of their strength, their sheer hard work, their tenacity, the very characteristics that make for a good entrepreneur. Would wish to invest about $2 million to $5 million in this African women's businesses. We look forward to that opportunity. We are very alive to the statistics that tell us that the reason African women are not economically empowered is that 40% of businesses in the continent are owned by women, but only 2% of them access institutional capital for the growth of their businesses. But I'm also aware that these women find the process of courting capital rather daunting and very brutal. I suspect that many of them have that experience vicariously through other people. Very few actually try to put themselves through the process. Yes, it is very daunting, and it can be very bruising. But I'll tell you one thing, there is no mystery to it. And it's the level of your preparedness and your ability to navigate the process that dictates what your experience will be. So I'm going to give you a bit of an insider about preparedness and navigating this. And it requires you as an entrepreneur to have a very honest conversation with yourself. I'll start with the first one. Be very clear about what is your story as an entrepreneur. Know yourself, know your business. Tell me where it started. Who are you? What is your experience? What is your product? What is your service? Do you know how to navigate the challenges in the industry that you're in? Do you know who your customer is? Do you know how to source that customer? Do you know what makes you competitive? Do you know how big your market is? I'm not talking about a glossy business plan that confines you. Flow with that. Tell the story with confidence, with ease. If you tell it to yourself first, when I ask you about it, you are not going to be frustrated. I'm going to ask you about it if you come to me for capital. You only have a business when you have a strong paying customer and you have a business that is worth investing in, that is growing. Second point is, you must tell me why you're looking for funding. When you tell me why you're looking for funding, it gives you an opportunity to narrate the vision for your growth. Give yourself a chance to do that. And when you narrate it, you must remember that you own the opportunity. I can only ever buy into the vision that you're selling to me. Whether I have a pro-women initiative or I'm a government-owned thing, I have to buy into a vision that you tell me. Tell me how much you're looking for and what you're going to do that. It tells me about how you look to implement your vision. Don't send a wish list. Every so often we deal with very long wish lists, and I look at them, I read your business plan. At 6 p.m., I'm like, oh, this is a big dreamer. Align the story. Don't be taken over by the fact that I can give you $5 million and you want to spend all of it and you lose yourself in it. Understand the capital that you should be talking to, that you should be courting. Understand that they're doing the amount of money you're looking for, that you fit the profile. Don't fight the criteria. Don't call me and saying, I'm a woman, you must give me money. No, you must still give me something. What excites me? What is your value proposition to me as an investor? Are you giving me the returns? Are you giving me the social impact story? Are you taking us into intra-export, inter-trade, export, things that we are getting excited about? Familiarize yourself with my process. Be very clear. Follow through it. Give more information. Never run away from giving information. I'll tell you that in the space that I'm in, it's very easy to say no. It's very difficult to say yes. And it's difficult to say yes because I need to produce at least 20-page document about you for me to present to somebody that you are worth having a conversation about. If you don't give me information, I can't put up a 20-page document. So I'm going to ignore you. Don't make it easy for me to say no. Give me. Follow up. Put a person behind the process that you are engaging with. It is your fault if you don't follow through on it. It's not my fault if I don't give you a call back. You are looking for it. Own the process. And be upfront with your honesty. If there's any dirty laundry that you need to tell me about that I might find on Google, you are better off telling me upfront. If you have fought any business partners, you owe SARS, you have a bad credit record, you are better off telling me upfront, because when I find it by myself, you have lied to me. I peg you and I put you aside. Air your dirty laundry. Make it, engage me on it. It's very important. Don't run away from it. I'm going to find it anyway. Watch your blind spot. Very many entrepreneurs have very big illusions about the value of their businesses and the great idea that they're pursuing. They find it challenging to have a conversation on equity simply because they think they're onto something big, and you can't. You're buying in cheap, or you are going to get it for free. But if it requires my money for it to happen, you are better off having a conversation with me to unlock that. I try to say something that requires a long time in a very brief time. I do this work to celebrate my mother, but also to contribute to a narrative that represents the African woman I know. Thank you.